I'm Aoife Spillane-Hinks. I am a director and I also work a lot as a teacher, mainly an acting teacher.
And Aoife, the brightness of your room is putting the dullness of my room to shame. The color of your blouse and your blue. And I'm sickened now. I should have got a nice picture behind me again to match this one. Aoife,
This, this is the only DIY project I have ever done, was
really,
to sand, and these are actually from a set. This is from a set of a show that I did 3 years ago, and I sanded them down. I spray painted them bright blue. I'm very proud of it.
well, there's recycling in action. Come here, tell us, bring us back. When you're a child, was this something you felt always was in you that you wanted to do? Was it in your family?
Yeah, so so there's a big origin story,
No.
which is when I was 3 years old. My mom was working as a theater critic amongst many various odd jobs she was doing, and my dad was a graduate student at the time and basically living in the library. And one night a week, they would pay for a babysitter so that my mom could go out to the theater that night. So as the story goes, one night the babysitter canceled, and so my mother said, "Well, I have to go to the theater. I have to go do my job." And so she brought me in, and she said, "Listen, people don't like small kids to go to the theater, but I need you to come with me tonight." As I said, I was 3 at the time. She said, "I need you to come with me tonight, but I need you to be really grown up." So I went into the other room. I put on this big dress. I presume it was one of the secondhand dresses that I had in my dress up box. I took the lenses out of my sunglasses and put them on, and came back and went, "I'm ready to go." And now this is actually true. The production that we went to see that night was an Irish touring production of Waiting for Godot. I cannot figure out who was in it, who did the production. But anyway, we saw that. I thought it was hilarious. I loved it. And as the story goes, she never got a babysitter again.
Wow.
So it was a really good place to grow up. New Haven, Connecticut, where I'm from, was a really good place to grow up as a kid who became interested in theater because there was lots of great theater. So I ended up then probably saw at least one play a week or one opera a week with my mom, or on my own then, at least once a week for the rest of my childhood, young adulthood, until I went to college.
And then what did you do? Like, was college, was it that area you studied in?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, what had happened in my last year in high school was I had been in a conservatory high school where I'd go to my regular academic school during the morning, do all my classes, and then I'd come to this school, just like a public school that drew from all over the region, and we would train in theater. And at the end of my time there, in my fourth year, the head of the department said, "You're a director." And the minute she said it, it just, people say to me, "Was that just her way of saying that you were a really bad actor?" I was like, "I really don't think so." And for me, in the moment, I suddenly felt like I was set on fire. And so then when I went into college, I knew that I wanted to do theater. Um, but I went to Harvard, and at the time, they didn't have a theater degree. So I had to find something else to do. So I did folklore and mythology. And within that, in my time not in class, I was directing plays. There was a really wonderful dram soc that was there, so I was doing lots of that. But then in class, obviously I was learning lots of things that were outside of theater, but I started to refine what I was doing as my kind of dissertation work, into Irish theater and into what J.M. Singh was doing in the Aran Islands with this ethnographic material that he was taking from living there, and why he was turning that into plays.
Okay.
So that's what I ended up doing with my final work there.
And are there Irish links in your family? Like, is there?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, my great grandmother and great grandfather would have come over about 100 years ago, a little like 1915, to Boston, and my great grandmother worked as a domestic worker there, and I believe that my great grandfather worked as a bus driver. And but even though it's several generations back, my mom would have grown up on the ground floor of a three-unit building, and that grandmother, I think, was on the top floor. And so when she would come home every day from school, that was the place she went. So all of the people in Fireys, County Kerry, where our family is from, they were as if they were living around the corner. So mom was going over to Kerry from far younger than I am, back in her early 20s. And so then I knew those people as well. And mom and I would come over to Ireland loads when I was, I think starting when I was about 8 or 9, because she did a lot of journalism about Irish culture and Irish politics for publications in the States. So I'd often just come over when she was working, or we would just come over for a summer and basically camp, on beaches, behind pubs and things. So,
Aoife, what was it that, do you think, back then when you were 3 and kind of as you went up through your child, what was it? What was that thing that you went, oh?
Well, it's interesting that you ask, because I've been finding recently that I've been really working to find that again. And I think part of it is that absolute immersion in something entirely different, in a world, in a life, in a person who you didn't know existed 5 minutes before you went into the theater, and suddenly you're plunged there. You might be howling with laughter, you might be sobbing, but you are completely lost in this complete other reality. And I suppose from there I found, and then when I was a little bit older than 3, I started performing, and I loved that connection with the audience. I think one of the things that drew me to it then and now is I loved that structured way in which I could be with people, that we had this thing that we were doing together. We had this reason why all of us would come together. We had something to talk about, to focus on, to believe in together. So I suppose there was that element of it. But I remember seeing a play when I was 14 called Peter and Wendy, by an amazing company called Mabu Mines. I think they've probably come over in years past to the theater festival. And it was this retelling of Peter Pan, and it was at a time when I'll probably end up starting crying right now about it. It was at a time when I was going from being a kid to being a young adult. And Peter and Wendy's all about, Peter Pan is all about saying goodbye to things about childhood and innocence. And here was this play, and they use a lot of puppetry, a lot of playful shadow work and all this kind of stuff. Really simple staging, really, there's no magic. You can see all the things working. The puppeteers are visible, everything. And I went back and back and back to see this play. It came and toured to New Haven. And I would just sit there in floods of tears, because it was telling me something about what I was going through that I had no words for, And in some ways, with all the kind of roughness that we can experience with one another when we're that age, where we're not necessarily able to articulate those things or feel safe to say exactly where we are to our friends. We might sound stupid or embarrassing or whatever else. Here was this play that just showed me myself. And I suppose that kind of capacity to move beyond words, even though you're using words.
Yeah.
But to move beyond the literal meaning of the conversations we have or things we read, it goes into something that's beyond words, that is poetry.
Yeah,
whatever.
I think it's fascinating what you're saying there as well, and even the way you say you're feeling. But I think it's also very apparent from talking to many, many people, both in public and who work in the arts. It's around actually being able to feel emotions that maybe you can't feel in your regular life. Or it's in a safe space to kind of, I remember, I think it was Bono said it about kind of, what he feels when people, he was asked what he feels when 70,000 people are singing his songs. And he kind of goes, well, they're not singing for me, they're singing for themselves. And I think that's, but I think that kind of is a really interesting piece, that it's not necessarily about what's going on stage. What's going on stage can sometimes be a trigger, that we empathize with the emotion of what's going on.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Then in relation to when you move, like, how long have you been here living in Ireland, Aoife?
So I've nearly been here 14 years.
Hey, wow.
Yeah, basically after I left college, I had come over here. I lived on Inishmaan in the summer of 2004 and 2005, doing field work, and you know, I don't think it's running anymore, but Chak Singh was out there, the house where Singh and so many of those other folks would have stayed. And at the time, it was set up as a place that people could go and visit and take a tour of. And there was a new wing of the thatched cottage, which was only 100 years old, where basically somebody could stay, a writer or an artist could stay, and in exchange for having that space, you ran the visitor center. You ran where people could come and visit. So I did that for 2 summers. Wow. And got to know that place, and had been over in Carrow studying Irish one of those summers as well, and had gone down to the Galway Arts Festival during the time the Druid Sing was on there. And being in Galway, seeing Druid Sing in '05, and just being in Ireland, I got a sense that it was a far better place to be a young artist than the States were. You know, we're talking pre-Obama, this is 2006. And because my mother had gotten her citizenship before I was born, because of her connection to Ireland, I was then automatically a citizen. So I was able to make that choice without worrying a lot about paperwork. But I ended up coming over specifically to do the MA in Drama and Theatre Studies at NUI Galway. So that's where I started off here. And to be honest, I did not expect to be here 14 years later. But there you go.
That's always a good thing. You know what I mean? I think, you know, I kind of similarly, if someone had told me, you know, 30 years ago that I would have been in Access now coming on 16 years, I would have gone, what? You mad? But I think, sorry, go back to, and I think there is something magical about, you know, people talking about the time that they arrived somewhere and the impact it had on. I mean, that must have been a really, I mean, having lived in Inishmaan for 2 summers and then coming to live and study in Galway around the time when, you know, when Druid were exploding into a whole new different kind of area for them, and having that amount of work kind of going on. How was that as a young theatre maker?
It was amazing. And actually Druid were really welcoming to me. So within the first couple of weeks that I came to Galway, I had briefly met Thomas Conway, who at the time was working as, you know, their dramaturg and the head of new writing there. I had briefly met him on Inishmaan when they had brought a couple of the plays to the town hall on the island, and I'd just gone up because I recognized him from the program. And of course I was obsessed with everyone in Druid. So I emailed him after I got there, after I got to NUIG in September 2006. And I said, I see you have this new play on. My gosh, now I'm forgetting what it was called.
It'll come back to you.
Empress of India?
It'll come back.
I don't know where that. And I just said, true, like college theater head, completely not professional theater head. But I said, listen, I've just moved to Galway. We met briefly on Inishmaan last summer. I see you have a new show on. Like, if you need anyone to sweep the floors or like focus a light, like I'm around. And he said, well, why don't we, you know, come in and have a chat? And so we had a chat. And I started doing some informal research for him, kind of looking into stuff that he might look into for Druid. Got to know the people who worked there. They were always really lovely. And that Thomas himself became the person who really galvanized me into the professional phase of my career, because he said, you have to start coming to Dublin. The Dublin Fringe Festival is on right now. You have to come see everything. Whatever you do, take the train up and back all the time. You just have to see everything. So I started just doing that, really, because he just pushed me and said, you know, you're serious about this. You got to be seeing as much stuff as you possibly can that's going on in this island.
And then sort of from there, then Aoife, in relation to, I suppose, making the leap then into making work of yourself, was that a hard journey?
Well, it was easy in some ways and hard in other ways. I started a company. I started a company with my classmates, and we did a couple of shows in relatively rapid succession in 2007. And we ended up going to Edinburgh that year. it was a bruising experience for all of us, I think. And actually, you know, I went from being really close with a bunch of people to actually, you know, we kind of left with a lot of war wounds.
Yes.
So really absolutely no hard feelings this far out, certainly, but it taught me a lot about a lot of things. One of them being that I realized my desire to start making work and start being a grown-up director led me to the equivalent of a very early marriage,
Okay.
where and an early marriage that might end in early divorce is still not a mistake.
Yeah.
It's just a marriage that wasn't forever. And I felt the same was I had this great desire to come together and be bonded with people and to make work and to make lots of work and just start it already, start the thing. And I'm really glad for what we did, but it was definitely, it wasn't the right fit. So yeah, so we did all these shows. I learned a huge amount. And I actually started a PhD in Galway that following fall, so the fall of '07. And but relatively soon after that, I got into the Seeds program with Rough Magic. So at the beginning of 2008, I started up with them, and I started spending more and more time in Dublin, and ended up moving to Dublin a couple of months into 2008.
Okay.
Um,
And
so yeah,
what was the PhD in?
the PhD, which RIP, the PhD was in internationalization and Irish theater. So it was looking at, yeah, I mean, it was an incredible PhD. It was something that it was a PhD that was kind of set out and people applied to do that work. But for a lot of reasons, I'm not cut out for that kind of, you know, I think there's some people who can do that solo work. I mean, my father is a historian. He is literally that person. He can sit for days. Right now, he's self-isolated. He has no internet. He has no cell phone. All he has are all these documents from the 18th century, and he's happy out forever. For me, I can't be alone in a room and just work for days on end and days on end. And I am in awe of those who can. Sorry, there's a cat.
Okay.
But so yeah, it was an incredible experience to start the PhD, but it was not, again, there were several things in the first few years that I lived in Ireland that ended up really not being for me.
That's fair. But I suppose in a lot of ways, you say you have to find out these things, and it can be hard sometimes, but until you kind of go through that fire, it's hard to know what you really want or you really don't want.
Exactly, you know.
And Aoife, do you think you have a similar process approaching work that you direct now? Because you've directed many, well, I'm fascinated by your work because you've directed many different types of work. Do you know what I mean? It's not, you know, and is that something that you seek out, or is that something that, yeah, that just falls? Do you think you have a similar process across all your work?
I think that at the end of the day, for me, I am an interpretive artist. So there is always a text to which I am responding, which I am serving, and to which I return whenever it is unclear where things need to go next. Mm-hmm. So, and the reason I say it like that is that if I'm working with a new play where it might be evolving and where I might be having input into where it goes next, the text still exists insofar as the playwright's intent, the story that must be told, the questions that must be asked remain immutable in the center of a text which may be shifting.
Okay.
So in the same way as I might direct a Shakespeare play and we're constantly going back, well, what does it say, right? What's that Samuel Beckett quote? What does it mean? What does it say? Constantly going back to that. Even in a process where things might be shifting and evolving and being edited during the time, I always believe that there is a central intent that you can serve and honor, and that not only me, not only the actors, but if there's a writer creating something as we're working that they can return to. And one of my jobs is to identify what that lighthouse is that we are always looking to for the light. And when I need to, I can remind people of what that lighthouse is.
Yeah.
So,
and do you find, like, I suppose what's interesting, and I kind of come up against a lot myself as a director, is that moment of letting go in relation to when you move to, you know, through the technical rehearsal phase to your previous stage, to your opening night. Is that a difficult process for you, or is that something you kind of go, oh, grand, I'm done?
I find it really difficult. I mean, like literally physically, when I was a kid, not a kid, but when I was in college, I couldn't sit in the audience of my plays because I'd be like rocking back and forth.
Yeah.
And, you know, so, and now I just don't find that I have achieved what I'm sure there are people who have achieved. I can't separate myself from it.
Yeah.
Emotionally, in any way. But one thing that I've learned from longer runs of shows where I have gone away from them for a while,
yeah.
Is, and I think this is a really important thing to remember when you're working on letting go of something, is when you come back to a show, maybe it's been on the road, you haven't been with it, and you come and see it again, and you realize what was discovered when you were gone, you know? And it might be because of structures that you put in place or questions that you asked. You know, it's not as if, you know, get the director out of the room, you'll finally make it work.
Yeah.
But it's allowing yourself to have the reverence for that unnameable thing that happens when actors own it.
Yeah. And I suppose in a way that it leads on to my next question in relation to, you know, trying to mind that relationship between the text, the actors, and the audience. I think that, you know, it was in the role of the director, because, you know, we've all been at shows that have forgotten the audience. You're kind of going, well, what am I doing here? But that sense of how is, that can be quite difficult to achieve, that, you know, the audience are going to want a piece of this.
Yeah. And I think it's a really hard thing for us to remember sometimes as directors is it does matter what they need. Whether it's simple things like audibility, whether it's simple things like, you know, do they understand the word that you just said? And over into much bigger decisions, much bigger conceptual questions or staging questions. And I think that also, that's something that I find I'm still struggling with in terms of the kind of material I choose. Now, you were asking before, you know, that I work with a lot of different material, and often people will come to me with material, but I find, you know, when I look at people like yourself, when I look at people who run theaters and make curatorial choices, I am in awe of that feat of allowing yourself as a curator, as an artistic director, to be drawn to work, to be sparked by work, but also to keep in your mind both what people need, that they might know that they might not know what they need, and also what people want, and how to maintain the artistic integrity within that, but also to not just go, screw all of you, I'm the artist, I know what's good, because what use is that if nobody wants to come and see it?
Absolutely. And actually, one thing that struck me last night, because you've had the real experience quite immediately of having a show that you directed and toured on the stage being read in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic last night. So there's all this talk of like online versus offline shows. But maybe speak about that show generally, Aoife, and then maybe we'll talk about the online offline piece. How did that kind of come about?
Oh, I love that piece so much, and I just love what Owen wrote. So it's a play by Owen Colfer. Breda Cash got in touch with me in late 2017 and said, "I'd like you to come in, have a read of a play with the playwright and a couple of actors, and just see if this is something. See if this is something." Holy Mary was a play that Owen had written years before and was a one act, but Breda had approached him and said, I think this is a 2-act play. Will you write the second act? So Breda brought us in, had a read of it. And what Owen had done was he took a 1-act play, which was about a little girl who's preparing for her first Holy Communion, but her dad has left. What we learn is that her dad has left her mother to take up with another woman in the same community, who has a daughter who also goes to this little girl's school. But this little girl, Mary, says, my daddy's on a secret mission. He's a spy. So that's how she deals with the reality. But so anyway, her mom does not have enough money to get her a nice dress. They get a secondhand dress. It's not white. She bleaches it. It's all this kind of stuff. And there's another little girl in the school named Magella, and she's the girl that Mary's daddy lives with now. And Magella is Mary's bully. And all we know about Magella is everything that she does to Mary, because all we get in the 1-act play is Mary's perspective. So what Owen did in the second half was he wrote Magella's play. And we go through the same sequence of events, but from the other side, from the girl who's actually lost her daddy to suicide. Mm-hmm. Now this sounds all very dark. It's this lovely, nostalgic, joyful, hilarious play. But the reason I touch on all these things is that what Owen did, and he took a lot of the material in the play from his experience as a school teacher. What he did was create a light, fun play where you don't have to be thinking about all the social issues that actually Owen is grappling with in the play. He's made this beautiful, joyful play. It's really wonderful escape. If you're at the end of your long workday, you come to the theater, you see this, you're really happy, you're letting go, you're laughing, you're having a good time with your friends. But also, it's a play about mothers and children. It's a play about people who have very little and who make something out of whatever they have because they love the children that they have. They believe in the families that they have. And it's also about, and sorry, I'm an emotional person. I just think it's a really beautiful thing that Owen has done. But it's also about what children, again, it comes back to the central idea of we all need stories. It's what children do when they can't explain these gaping, painful things that happen in their lives. And they find a story to tell themselves, to get themselves through it.
Yeah.
So anyway, so this is a beautiful play. Originally, Mary Murray and Mae Fitzgerald did it up in the Viking in 2018 during the insane snowmageddon that we had that shut everything down. We had our opening night. I think we were the only theater open in the entire city. Why? Because the Viking Theater has so many of the people go to the Viking Theater walk there.
Yeah.
So I just remember a neighbor, we don't have a car, a neighbor drove me down. We live in Whitehall, the Vikings in Clontarf. A neighbor of mine drove me down that night. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, this is the kind of thing that will keep theater surviving. Is that come rain, come snow, any of this stuff, here are people who this is their place. This is where they come for joy. The people who walk from their houses to this theater. So anyway, we opened. I don't think any other theater was open. It was great fun. And then it came back and toured in late 2018 with Mary Murray and Jacinta Sheeran. And Jacinta and Mary were due, we were all due, all of this is under Breda Cash Productions, I should say. She's the one who brought us all together. We were all due to have a run of this in the Gaiety and then go further afield for a month afterwards in May and June. So that's been postponed. And I just thought to myself, John Gunning was already doing these live streams online. I just said to myself, we've got this ready to go. It's a simple play. It's a straightforward play. It could read really well to an audience without the full staging. And the staging is very simple. We only tell it with chalkboard that the girls draw like a child might create their world out of chalk drawings, and they have 2 chairs. That's it anyway. So I said it to Breda, she said it to Owen, and the rest of the gang. We all said, this is great. John thought it was a great idea. He was incredible, set up all the tech and helped us with all the logistics. And yeah, the experience of doing it as a fully staged play and then doing it as a reading with Jacinta down in Clare reading from her house and Mary over in Chapel Is It, I think. What was really interesting about it, because I got a message from my mother who's still in New Haven, Connecticut, and that she was watching it from her computer. She had seen it before when it was on the theater. She said it was amazing how much more you got because you were just able to focus on the actors' faces. And Mary and Jacinta, as you know, have incredibly expressive faces. And so it was, I didn't know how it was going to go. You're always worried there's going to be some big technical glitch and some big part of the text is going to be gone. None of that happened, thank God. But it was an incredibly positive experience. And even just like there's a chat feature beside the screen. And like in this time when we can't be in the theater together, to see these people from potentially anywhere in the world writing about how much they're enjoying it, how great the performances are, how much this has made their day, it really does give one a little hope.
Yeah, great. And come here, I have one more question before I let you go, Aoife. Talk to me about, two kind of joint questions. Your own theatre company then at the moment, how did that kind of come about? Like your next theatre company?
the right marriage.
Right.
That was, so then this theater was founded in 2011 with myself, Mae Fitzgerald, and Tanya Dean. And that summer we worked on still one of the greatest experiences of my life, which was we adapted a novella from the late 19th century. An American writer named Charlotte Perkins Gilman wrote a novella called The Yellow Wallpaper. And it's all about a woman who is under one of these rest cures for the upper class women of that era in New England. And she's up in a room. She's not allowed to see her baby. She's probably just dealing with postpartum depression, but all that people see is that she's hysterical. So she's up in this room. She's allowed almost no exposure to anybody else, no encounters with anyone, kind of like all of us, except, and anyway, so Maeve and I, a year before, Maeve and I had become friends in 2009. We'd wanted to work together. 2010, we're sitting on the floor of my little bedsit in Phibsborough, and I just said, will you read this out loud? And she read the whole novella out loud, and we just looked at each other and we went, this is something. So the next summer, Tanya Dean, who had been over doing amazing work over at the Yale School of Drama in New Haven, was back for the summer. She's training as a dramaturg over in Yale, and we say, Tanya, you're around. You want to work on this with us? And so the three of us spent 3 glorious weeks taking this text, and Tanya's bringing in all of this, the different drafts, the different versions of the text, and punctuation here and there is different, and which one will we use, all the dramaturgical research materials about the time, about everything. 3 weeks adapting a text, and then 3 weeks rehearsing it. And we did it in the Fringe Festival, Dublin Fringe Festival, in Smock Alley. And so you have a Smock Alley boys' school. So you have this one woman in her bed in isolation, and Alison Cummins, the incredible set designer, we're lucky enough to have her. She'd been on Seeds with me, so she's working on this. Sarah Jane Shields lighting, and basically Ali gets these huge pieces of gauze and hangs them from the ceiling and hangs them all the way down to create this black space. We're not going to do yellow wallpaper. We're just going to have the audience imagine it. And she rips these big holes in that the audience stands and stares through and looks at Maeve in the center of the space with. Anyway, I'm going on and on. It was a joyful experience. I absolutely loved it. It was just one of those times when it's the work, you're working in the way that you wish to work. You feel like the work you do is the way that you'd like to, it's the level you'd like to achieve. The people you're working with are your heart and soul. So anyway, long story short, that show was the first show that then this did.
Yeah.
And we've done lots of different things since then. We've done other productions, and we've done a lot of work with lesser known classic texts from Shakespearean era and elsewhere. But at the moment, a lot of the questions come down to whether we can get funding to do the next work that we want to do.
Yeah, and I think that's, we're in time, obviously, when things have kind of stood still a bit in our industry. But I suppose that journey, I mean, you know, you mentioned Rough Magic Seeds, and you know, that's an incredible program about bringing
Yeah.
together and, you know, developing both work, but also opportunity to kind of engage with people of like minds as well. And kind of, you know, you mentioned that as being important to you. But I suppose my final question is about, you know, you on one hand you're a freelance director who, you know, is in some ways waiting on the phone call. You can you've then your own company that you might develop work with and kind of for.
Yeah.
And obviously you also do a lot of voice, you know, one-on-one kind of coaching or anything. But I suppose, do you know it has become more difficult or less difficult to forge a career in what you want to do?
So there are two answers. One of them is the external, and one of them is the internal.
Okay.
Externally, it has 100% become more difficult. Um, you know, I have been working for a decade, and you know, I left Seeds at the end of 2009. So, and year on year, it's gotten harder. Whether that's about the cuts to funding, whether that's about the cuts to people's ability to access social support. You know, when I first moved to Dublin, I had medical support. I had rent allowance that was so easy to get. My landlord didn't mind at all, and rent was nothing anyway. I had job seekers, I had all that stuff, and I was able to access that with dignity. And I know that all of these sources of resources have become more and more strained and more under attack. So from that end, I do think things are more difficult. You know, as much as I say that, for me personally, if I could bring me, myself, as I am now back 10 years, amazing. But the person I have become, the strength that I have found over years of not being strong, of not feeling capable and confident in my own value and the importance of the work that I do. In that way, I know that part of it has become easier.
Yeah. I think something that you just said there, I think is just hugely important, because I think, you know, and part of the reason, as I was saying to you before we recorded for this series, was to kind of, you know, expose the artist as a real person. You know, we are your neighbors, but also that there is those struggles that kind of everybody has. But yeah, an awful lot of the time in the arts, it comes down to funding, and obviously more money and funding is hugely important, but there's also respect in that relationship, or respect between artist and organization, or respect between artist and funder. That, you know, you said it took you, not to say it took you 10 years, but like, you know, that kind of sense of self-worth is hard fought, and particularly when you're working by yourself. And I think, you know, that's really something that needs to be, I suppose, discussed and amplified more.
100%. And in a field where we so often are tasked with presenting ourselves, there are so many times when the last thing we want to do is to be on show.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not as easy to quantify the value of psychological and mental resilience that is hard won.
Yeah. No, and I think it's something, from talking to a lot of actors and theatre makers over this, for those watching in the future, this has been recorded during the corona pandemic, but that there seems to be a real leveling in our society now. Everybody in the world is going through the same thing. We're all being asked to self-isolate. We're all being asked, and that creates, you know, a real strain on people's I suppose psychology becomes very different because by nature being human, we are very communicative, collaborative people. I think more so again for theatre artists or artists in general. But in a way, it's amazing to see the amount of artists trying to either carve out time for just being themselves and just
Yeah.
I'm just being here, and to avoid that push to create. And
Yeah.
I think that there's no question in that. I'm just fascinated by people's stories of resilience and how they achieve that, and I suppose how we can all plan together to maybe make it a bit easier.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I've just gone off on one side. So
That was wonderful.
I'll stop now. Aoife, thanks a million for taking part in this.
Thank
It's
you so much.
a joy to hear of your. I didn't realise that you lived on Inishmaan. That was very jealous now. And I look forward to having a couple with you again soon when we're all out of our caves.
Likewise. Take care.